Our next speaker is Wai Ying with the City of Honolulu. We'll be talking about some more sites, specifically near the Heart Station. So, Wai.
Hi, great talk, Tim. It's going to be exciting to see the redevelopment on the west side when we open up next year. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Wai Ying. I'm Heart's Environmental Manager. I've been with the project since 2015. Today I'll be going over the status of our Brownfields Assessment Grant as well as our cleanup grant that we received from the EPA in 2017. The award amount for the assessment grant was $300,000 and the award for the cleanup grant was $600,000. Next. A little bit of background on the project. Heart is semi-autonomous to the city and county. We're going to be building the first mass transit project in Hawaii, and it will be driverless. As Tim mentioned, we'll be constructing 20 miles, 21 stations from East Kapolei to Ala Moana Center. The train will begin operating the first 10 miles next year in 2021. Next. The construction status. We're finalizing the first 15 miles from East Kapolei. If you guys have been out to the airport, you've probably seen our large gantries who pull up our spans and connect the columns to build the guideway. So we're really excited that that's moving along really well. We've almost completed constructing the first 9 stations on the west side by where Tim was mentioning the TOD projects. We are also starting the stations in the airport. We've begun utility relocation in the city center from Middle Street Transit Center. And we're also finalizing acquisitions as well as conducting phase 1s and phase 2s ahead of acquisition. Next. Okay, so the city center phase 1, we had the community-wide $300,000 grant. So the phase 1s are the first step that we take in purchasing a commercial property. It's also the first step in the remediation process to determine if further investigation is needed. The ASTM standard practice satisfies landowner liability protection and constitutes all appropriate inquiries. Reports consist of electronic record evaluations, site walks, inspections, and determining if impacts using ASTM phase 1 standards require a phase 2. These reports are required by Heart's environmental impact statement. So we're very appreciative of the EPA's assistance in allowing us to continue updating these phase 1s ahead of acquisition. Next, please. So yeah, this is the last segment from Middle Street Transit Center to Ala Moana Center. Given the extent and large numbers of properties, and in order to manage reviews, as well as potentially identifying areas of lower and higher likelihoods of contamination and risk, the city center section was divided into smaller segments labeled as Group 1 through Group 5. Group 1 is from OCCC, Oahu Correctional Center, to Waikimilo Road. Group 2 is from Waikimilo Road to Ka'aahi Street, which is our Iwalei station. I'll talk about that later in the cleanup grant. Group 3 is from Ka'aahi Street to the Nimitz Highway area. And then Group 4 is from Bethel Street to Ward along Haleakila. And finally, we have Group 5 from Ward Avenue to Ala Moana Center. Next slide, please. Okay, we conducted 3 cycles to date. Cycle 1 consisted of 89 properties. Cycle 2 was about 78, and the third cycle we're working on is about 72 properties. It doesn't look like the properties has dropped down that much. That's because Sometimes during negotiations of the property, it may go from easement to fee, which may require us to do additional phase 1 or phase 2 work. It might be a partial take changed to a full take, which may also require additional assessments. Also, if columns are moved, then we also need to further assess those areas. Data evaluation included the ESRI integrated data compilation, evaluation, and reporting, extensive use of existing property data that we have from past construction, and use of electronic apps to ensure consistent site recon data when multiple people are collecting this. Next slide, please. As part of the phase 1 ESAs, properties were evaluated against a number of criteria to determine if a phase 2 was warranted. Things that we looked at was the likely to affect evaluation, potential contaminant type, proximity of potential contaminants, potential worker exposure, and the type of acquisition we're taking. So this wraps up the assessment grant for the city center. Grouping the sites really helped us manage the large volume of data, and we're able to complete the phase 1s prior to acquisition. So now I'm going to start talking about our cleanup grant at the EVA station. That was for $600,000 that we received in 2017 from the EPA. We're very appreciative of this. This is also a requirement from our EIS to remediate these sites. We recently completed remediation as part of the cleanup grant. I'm going to share with you some information, a few photos, and the status of the schedule update. In blue outlined is our station, and then in black we have the bus transfer station. Next, please. So HART conducted remediation work in advance of construction for the EVA station. While construction will occur on several parcels, the brownfield cleanup grant only covers area 4 in green here. So it was a former general printing shop. We remediated area 2 and 4 at the same time to lower the mobilization costs, although only area 4 is funded by the EPA. Next, please. Although contamination had been identified during previous environmental investigations, additional testing was performed to get a better understanding of the conceptual site model, exposure risks, delineate the contamination. So with soil sampling, we did multi-incremental soil sampling to 7 feet below ground surface. We had 1 foot layers. Each layer represented approximately 200 cubic yards of soil. Multi-incremental soil sampling, groundwater sampling, and soil gas sampling was conducted in area 4 in one mobilization to minimize time and to lower costs as well. Next slide, please. So what needed to be remediated under the cleanup grant? The multi-incremental soil sampling identified that soil in 2 of the 3 decision units, you can see we divided the site up into 3, required remediation in decision unit 8 and 9, the triangle one and the center decision unit. They had concentrations of arsenic greater than the Department of Health's environmental action levels for commercial industrial use. We also installed 2 groundwater monitoring wells that were sampled, and no contaminants were detected above unrestricted or commercial industrial EAL, so groundwater was clean. For soil gas, we detected PCE in one of the 2 soil gas probe locations in DU9. No other contaminants were detected. Everything was below unrestricted other than PCE. Next, please. So cleanup. Based on the results of the site characterization, a remedial action work plan was prepared and submitted to HDOH for review. The plan targeted excavation and removal of contaminated soil with a 6-inch buffer established above and below the vertical layers. So this included decision unit 8, the triangle-shaped one. We encountered the arsenic at 1 to 2 feet, as well as 3 to 4 feet. In order to include the 6-inch buffer, we ended up digging out 0.5 to 4.5 feet below ground surface in the triangle-shaped decision unit. The center decision unit 9, we encountered continuous contamination from 3 to 4 feet and 4 to 5 feet. So we removed 2.5 to 5.5 feet below ground surface soil. So that ended up being about 750 cubic yards per decision unit. Because vertical intervals had been characterized previously, you know, we had initially tested to 7 feet. No confirmation samples were required. This helped us to not have to remobilize, write another report. So this was great for us. Next, please. And some photos of the excavation work. Contaminated soil was excavated to the targeted intervals I mentioned earlier. We ended up with 94 loads and 1,800 tons that were disposed of at PVT landfill. Next, please. Groundwater was anticipated at approximately 5.5 feet, but in some areas, it appeared much shallower depths. Note that this area is tidally influenced. Next slide. For backfill and site restoration, quarry rock was used to delineate the bottom of the excavation layer, and clean fill material sourced from other parts of the project were used to backfill the excavation, and also the other clean layers were used to backfill as well. An environmental hazard management plan will be prepared to manage the soil that remains around the edges of the excavation that could not be removed due to access. Next, please. So finally, here's our project schedule. Site characterization and the work plan was thoroughly vetted with Department of Health in advance of construction. Remediation was completed last month in June 2020. The remedial action report we are planning to submit to HDOH next month. And then our grant expires at the end of the year in December. So we think that should be enough time to address any comments that HDOH may have. So that about wraps it up. Next slide. And here's my information if you need to contact me or if you have any questions. Thank you.